There comes a moment in every person's life when the familiar starts to feel unbearable. That job you've endured for years begins to feel suffocating. Conversations with certain friends leave you feeling empty, not energized. Even your own habits, scrolling endlessly through social media, tolerating toxic relationships, procrastinating your passions, start to feel like silent betrayals of your soul. At first, you think something's wrong. But Carl Jung would tell you, something is finally right. In his work, The Undiscovered Self, Jung explains that the modern individual often lives inauthentically, chained to social masks, drained by external demands, and disconnected from the true self. When you start rejecting what once seemed normal, it's a powerful sign that you're stepping into psychological alignment. Marcella, a 42-year-old mother of 3 from Wisconsin, shared this story. After a decade in a stable but soul-numbing job, she began experiencing chest pains, not from illness, but from emotional repression. "It wasn't anxiety," she said, "it was my soul screaming." The day she walked out of that office, she didn't have a plan. But for the first time in years, she could breathe. This moment is what Jung refers to as the withdrawal of projections. The instant you stop blaming external circumstances for your unhappiness and begin reclaiming your internal power. You no longer tolerate what drains you because your psyche is demanding integration. At first, this shift can be terrifying. You might feel guilty, isolated, even reckless. But as Napoleon Hill said in Outwitting the Devil, fear is the tool of a man-made devil. And in truth, that fear is the dying gasp of your old identity trying to keep you safe. But you're not here to play safe. You're here to evolve. So if you've recently felt an overwhelming need to walk away from a job, a relationship, or even a version of yourself, it's not failure. It's your soul clearing space. And the best stage of your life? It begins where your tolerance ends. Carl Jung called these events synchronicities, not because they're random, but because they are meaningful coincidences. In his essay, Synchronicity, an acausal connecting principle, Jung explores how certain events, while not causally related, arrive together with striking psychological relevance. It's as if the outer world is mirroring the internal one. When someone is on the verge of transformation, Jung believed the unconscious seeks to guide them. But it doesn't do this through logic or instruction. It uses symbols, dreams, and events that carry personal meaning. That's why a song, a phrase on a billboard, or a chance meeting can hit you with a strange emotional weight. It's not the event itself, it's what it awakens inside you. Take Marcos, for example. He was going through a quiet crisis, burned out at work, unsure of his next step. One morning, while commuting, he saw graffiti on a wall, "Wake up before you forget who you are." The words lingered for days. They weren't part of his rational plan, but they stirred something deeper. And that's the essence of synchronicity. It bypasses logic and speaks directly to the soul. Jung writes, "It is impossible to give a general answer to the question of meaning. Meaning is a psychic process which appears subjectively as a certain kind of emotional value. This means the meaning isn't in the event, it's in how it moves you. If something feels profound, even if small or strange, your psyche is inviting you to pay attention. So if these meaningful coincidences have begun showing up more often in your life, don't brush them aside. Write them down. Sit with them. Ask what part of you is being activated. Because according to Jung, synchronicity is one of the ways the unconscious prepares you for the next version of yourself. Before transformation arrives, resistance shows up, and it often speaks in your own voice. That voice, the one that says, "You're not ready," or "You're not good enough," is not the truth. It's a survival mechanism, and Carl Jung understood this better than most. In The Undiscovered Self, Jung warns that the greatest threats to our growth don't come from the outside, but from within. As a person moves closer to their authentic self, the unconscious begins to challenge everything that was built on illusion, ego, roles, beliefs. And the ego, terrified of dissolving, fights back. Loudly. You might experience this as an inner critic that suddenly becomes relentless. Thoughts like, "You'll fail," "You're too late," or "What will they think?" begin to take center stage. This is not a sign to stop. It's a sign that you're getting close to something real. Consider Helen, a 55-year-old nurse from New York. For years, she dreamed of opening a healing retreat. But every time she made progress, her mind flooded with doubts. What if it's too risky? What if no one comes? She told herself. But those weren't objective thoughts. They were the ego's last defense before surrendering to purpose. Jung believed that the journey to wholeness, the individuation process, requires confrontation with the shadow, the part of ourselves we reject or fear. The inner critic often emerges from this very shadow. And ironically, when it grows louder, it's often because the ego senses it is losing control. Jung wrote, "As long as the individual is not conscious of this conflict, he is, to a certain extent, immune to its disturbing effect. But when it breaks through into consciousness, it can lead to a real collision. That collision, though painful, is necessary. It is the crash that wakes you up. So if your doubts are getting louder, if you're criticizing yourself more than usual, know this. It doesn't mean you're on the wrong path. It means your old self is losing its grip. And your deeper self, the one that holds your true potential, is about to emerge. Breathe. Observe. Don't fight the voice, but don't believe it either. Because once you step through this storm, you'll see that the voice was never the real you. It was just the gatekeeper to the best stage of your life. There's a strange moment in life when everything you once were begins to dissolve, but what you are becoming hasn't yet taken shape. It's a space between identities. A void that feels both terrifying and invigorating. Carl Jung understood this deeply, and in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, he described it as a necessary crisis, a psychological rebirth disguised as confusion. When you're in this space, you might wake up with no motivation to do the things you used to enjoy. You might walk through your day feeling like you're watching life from the outside. You feel lost, but also strangely free. It's not depression. It's transition. Take Kevin, a 37-year-old engineer from Austin. He spent a decade climbing the corporate ladder, building a life others admired. But inside, something began to ache. He couldn't explain it. He just knew that success no longer felt satisfying. One day, he left his job, bought a sketchbook, and began drawing again for the first time in 20 years. He didn't know what came next, and yet he felt more alive than ever. Jung believed that this discomfort is essential. The old self must die for the new one to emerge. But unlike a physical death, this kind of transformation is internal, and it's not visible to others. That's why it feels so lonely. He writes, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And this is precisely what begins to happen in this stage. You're no longer playing roles. You're no longer seeking approval. You're beginning to meet the raw, unfiltered truth of who you really are, and that truth has not yet found its voice. In this in-between space, don't panic. You are not broken. You are becoming. The ego hates this uncertainty, but the soul is nourished by it. This is where intuition strengthens, where deeper values begin to surface, and where the path ahead starts to form, not through effort, but through allowing. If you feel both lost and alive right now, you're exactly where you need to be. According to Jung, this is not a detour. This is the sacred passage between the known and the true self. And it's the threshold of your greatest chapter. Something remarkable happens as you begin to shed the roles and masks that once defined you. The world, almost mysteriously, begins to respond. You meet people who speak your language without needing translation. You stumble upon ideas, books, or conversations that align with a version of yourself you are just starting to discover. Carl Jung, in Psychological Types, explored how individuals move toward wholeness through the process of integrating their inner opposites, what he called individuation. As you become more psychologically whole, your external world begins to reflect this harmony. What once felt chaotic starts to make sense. What once felt distant becomes familiar. Take the story of Aisha, a 29-year-old photographer from London. For years, she shaped her life around others' expectations, career, appearance, even her spiritual beliefs. But something shifted. She started journaling, setting boundaries, and reconnecting with childhood interests. Within months, she met 3 new people, each pursuing their own authentic path, and together they began creating a passion project that felt like home. It wasn't luck. It was resonance. Jung believed that as we move away from persona, the social mask, and closer to the self, our psychic energy reorganizes. We unconsciously begin to select new environments, people, and ideas that are more aligned with our true nature. He writes, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." This is not just poetic, it's psychological. When we meet others from a place of authenticity, we don't just connect, we evolve. These encounters act as catalysts for further growth. You may find yourself suddenly repelled by gossip or superficial distractions, and drawn instead to people who speak of purpose, healing, creativity, or inner work. You may begin to read more deeply, to think more symbolically, to question what you used to accept without doubt. This is not coincidence. It is a reflection. The outer world begins to mirror the clarity, depth, and frequency of your inner world. If this is happening to you, if the right books, teachers, communities, or opportunities are coincidentally showing up, it's because you're no longer attracting from the wounded ego. You're attracting from the aligned self. And that means the best stage of your life isn't coming, it has already begun. So here's the truth. The best stage of your life doesn't begin with applause or clarity. It begins quietly, with discomfort, with a sense of misalignment, with strange signs, loud doubts, quiet awakenings. If you felt any of these 7 signs, it's not a coincidence. It's confirmation. Carl Jung taught us that the psyche evolves not in a straight line, but through symbols, crises, and revelations. And if these moments are showing up in your life, don't ignore them. You are not going backwards. You are being called forward toward purpose, authenticity, and inner peace. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these 7 signs have you felt the most? Leave a comment below and let's walk this journey together. And if this message stirred something inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who's standing at their own threshold. Subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and turn on the bell, because we're just getting started. And your soul knows it.